You're still single, huh? Guess some people just aren't the marrying type. That sentence came out of my sister's mouth so casually, like it was part of the Thanksgiving prayer. Everyone at the table chuckled soft, polite, a little too rehearsed, except me. I just sat there, holding my fork in midair, pretending the turkey on my plate was suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. It wasn't the first time Amanda had said something like that. She always did it with that same syrupy tone, her lips curled into a smile that looked warm enough to fool anyone who didn't know her. But I did. I'd known her my whole life. I knew that tone meant only one thing: she was about to humiliate me in front of everyone. My name's Lauren. I'm 34, single, or at least that's what everyone in this house thought. I have a stable career as an environmental scientist in Seattle. I own my own condo, and I'm married to someone who actually treats me like a human being. But in this family, none of that matters. Success isn't measured by happiness, it's measured by how many people clap for you at your wedding. And Amanda, oh, she got plenty of applause. Sitting across from me, she looked like she'd stepped out of a holiday commercial, hair perfectly curled, engagement diamond glinting every time she moved her hand, husband beside her smiling like a man who'd just won a trophy. I swear the light hit her ring at the exact moment she reached for the gravy boat, sending a flash straight into my eyes. Subtle, always subtle. Can you pass the cranberry sauce, Lauren? She asked sweetly, like nothing had just happened. Sure, I replied, sliding the bowl toward her, keeping my voice steady. My mother's voice followed immediately, picking up the conversation where Amanda left off. You know, Amanda's wedding was just beautiful, she said, her tone full of pride. The flowers alone cost more than most people's cars. And that venue, what was it called again? The Glen Haven Country Club, Amanda said, pretending to blush. But Ethan, she glanced at her husband, has connections. It's one of the perks of being married to a successful attorney. Everyone laughed again. I didn't, I just kept eating. The turkey was dry, as always. Mom never managed to time it right, but no one would ever dare say that aloud. Not to her. In this house, criticism flowed one way, and it was always toward me. Lauren, you really should have come to the wedding, Dad said, his voice mild but loaded. You missed something truly special. I'm sure it was lovely, I said quietly. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Lovely, she repeated. It was the wedding of the century. Everyone who mattered in this town was there: the Carters, the Whitmans, even Mayor Collins. Amanda smiled wider. 320 guests. Almost everyone we invited came. I took another sip of wine. The trap was coming, I could feel it. After decades of family dinners, I'd learned the rhythm of their cruelty: compliment, boast, pause, then the jab. It didn't take long, so, speaking of weddings, Amanda began, her tone dripping with false innocence. When are you finally going to settle down, Lauren? You're not getting any younger, you know. I set my fork down carefully. My heart was pounding, but my hands didn't shake. Before I could answer, Mum jumped in. She's been dating that man for years. Now what's his name again? James, John, Daniel, I corrected gently. His name is Daniel. Oh, right, Daniel, Mum said, waving her hand dismissively. What does he do again? Something about computers. He's a software engineer at Microsoft, I said. Amanda laughed, a high, tinkling sound that reminded me of broken glass. Oh, that's right, the IT guy. Does he even own a suit? Her husband chuckled under his breath. Dad stared at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his mashed potatoes. He never joined in, but he never stopped it, either. His silence had always hurt worse than their words. When's the big day? Then, Amanda pressed, eyes sparkling. Or is he dragging his feet? You know, men can tell when a woman's desperate. It's not a good look. I felt the heat rise in my chest. For a moment, I almost gave her what she wanted: a reaction, an argument, something to feed her smug satisfaction. But instead, I exhaled slowly and said, actually, we already had the wedding. The entire table went still. The only sound was the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Mum said finally, her voice brittle. I'm married, I repeated calmly. We got married 8 months ago, June 14th, to be exact. Amanda's mouth fell open. That's impossible, she said, her laugh shaky. You didn't. I did, I interrupted. You all got invitations. For a second, no one spoke. Then Dad frowned. Lauren, we never received any invitations. You must be mistaken. I smiled, a small, sad smile that had been waiting years to surface. No mistake. I sent 5 invitations, all certified mail, all signed for on April 24th. Amanda's face paled. I didn't pull out my phone right then. That part comes later, but I could feel the blood drain from her face. Could see her throat tighten. She knew exactly what I was talking about. Mum reached for her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly. You're saying, we were invited. I'm saying someone made sure you never saw the invites. The words hung there between us, heavy and electric. For as long as I could remember, Amanda had been the center of gravity in this family. Everything revolved around her grades, her friends, her relationships, her wedding. I was the quiet one, the steady one, the one who didn't cause problems. And somehow, that had made me invisible. I can't count the number of times I drove 4 hours each way just to spend the holidays here, rearranging my work schedule, showing up, only to spend the whole weekend watching them talk about Amanda like she'd cured cancer. I'd tell myself it didn't matter. I'd tell myself I was strong enough to handle it. But that night, sitting at the same old table with the same china plates and the same dry turkey, something inside me shifted. I realized I wasn't angry because they didn't show up to my wedding. I was angry because I'd spent 34 years begging to be seen. And the worst part, they never even noticed I'd stopped trying. The silence stretched long and awkward. Mum cleared her throat. Well, she said stiffly, if this is true, then I suppose congratulations are in order. Thanks, I said. It was a beautiful day. Amanda didn't move. Her fork lay untouched beside her plate. She was still smiling, but the edges of that perfect grin were cracking. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt something new, a kind of calm power that comes from finally telling the truth out loud. I took another sip of wine, let the burn steady me, and said softly, you didn't miss the wedding because you weren't invited. You missed it because you chose not to see me. The table fell quiet again. The laughter that had filled the room just minutes ago was gone, replaced by the sound of 4 people realizing the golden daughter's shine wasn't so blinding anymore. And as I sat there, staring into the flickering candlelight, I thought to myself, maybe this Thanksgiving, I finally stopped being the family's invisible one. For a long second, no one moved. The clinking of forks, the soft hum of the heater, everything stopped. Even the candlelight seemed to flicker slower, like the house itself was holding its breath. Amanda blinked first. You're married, she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and laughter, like I'd told the world's most absurd joke. Come on, Lauren, that's not funny. I'm not joking. My tone was even steady. I'd practiced calm for years in this family. We had a small ceremony in June. Mum frowned, her expression frozen somewhere between confusion and irritation. Why on earth would you get married without telling us? That's not how family works. Funny, I said softly, because I remember sending you all invitations. Certified mail, signed delivery. Her eyes darted to Amanda. That tiny movement, barely a twitch, was all I needed to see. Amanda let out a nervous laugh, her voice suddenly higher than usual. Lauren, please. We never got any invitations. I would have remembered something like that. I'm sure you would have, I said, and took out my phone, which is why I kept receipts. I swiped through my files, the same way a lawyer presents evidence to a hostile witness. The screen glowed in the warm, golden light, illuminating the faces that had once looked down on me. April 24th, I said, reading off the email confirmation. 5 certified envelopes. 1 to Mum and Dad, 1 to you, 1 to Grandma, and 2 to close family friends. All signed for on delivery. Want to guess who signed for yours? Amanda's color drained. Let me guess, Ethan said awkwardly, trying to lighten the mood. A mailman mix-up. I turned the phone toward him. A photo of the delivery receipt filled the screen. Amanda Carter's signature, neat and familiar, scrawled right beside the tracking number. She signed for it, I said quietly. Then she never gave it to anyone. The silence was deafening. Mum's single quote as hand flew to her chest. Amanda, sweetheart, that can't be right. Tell her that's not right. Amanda opened her mouth, then closed it again. She was pale, eyes darting from me to the phone like a trapped animal. I don't know what that is, she finally managed. It could be fake, really. I scrolled down to another photo, this time the post office record, because this looks like your handwriting. And this, I clicked again, is the tracking log showing the package delivered to your home address at 3:42 p.m. that day. Dad leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. Lauren, he said, voice heavy, this is a lot to take in. Are you sure there isn't some mistake? Dad, I said, my voice breaking just slightly, I sent you an invitation because I wanted you there. I wanted all of you there, and I waited. I checked the mailbox every day for a reply that never came. So no, there's no mistake. Mum's face tightened. She reached for her napkin, dabbing at her mouth, though there was nothing to wipe away. If what you're saying is true, she began, then why didn't you call us when no one responded? I did, I said, 3 times. You didn't pick up, and Amanda, I looked straight at her. You told me you were busy every single time. Amanda's lips trembled. I didn't, you did, I said firmly. You said you were traveling. You told me you were in San Francisco for a conference, but according to your Instagram, you were at Mom's house that entire weekend. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside her. Amanda, what is she talking about? She didn't answer, and then it hit me like a wave that had been building for years but finally crashed. This wasn't about a lost invitation. It was about control, about keeping me small, quiet, and out of the picture. Amanda had spent years being the center of attention, the daughter who could do no wrong. Maybe she thought my wedding would shift that balance. Maybe she couldn't stand the idea of me having a moment that wasn't hers to steal. I set my phone down on the table, the screen still lit with proof. You didn't want them to come, I said, my voice calm now. You wanted to make sure my day went unnoticed, so you took that chance away from me. The room was heavy with the kind of silence that no one wants to break. Mom's eyes filled with tears, frustration, guilt, or maybe just embarrassment. Amanda, please tell me this isn't true. Amanda's chin quivered. I didn't think it would matter, she whispered. It was just a small ceremony. You didn't even tell us you were engaged, because you made fun of me every time I brought Daniel up. I said, you told me he wasn't good enough, that he was boring. You called him a phase. She pressed her palms to her eyes. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't think exactly. I cut in. You didn't think. You just decided for me. Dad exhaled loudly, the sound slicing through the tension. Amanda, this is disappointing. His voice was low, measured, but I could hear the weight behind it. You had no right to do that. Amanda's tears spilled over, but for once, they didn't move me. Maybe there was a time when I would have jumped to comfort her to keep the peace, but that time was over. Mom, still trying to gather control, straightened in her seat. Lauren, she said, I'm sure your sister made a poor decision, but you can't hold on to anger forever. We're family. I laughed softly just once, without humor. You keep using that word like it's supposed to mean something. Don't be cruel, she said. Cruel. I met her eyes. You missed my wedding. All of you. You left an empty seat where my parents should have been. You left me explaining to Daniel why his new family didn't show up. You think showing the truth is cruel. Mom didn't answer. She just looked down at her plate, tears threatening to fall but never quite forming. Amanda whispered, I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, small and weightless. I looked at her for a long moment. No, you're embarrassed, I said quietly. There's a difference. She flinched. Ethan cleared his throat, pushing back from the table. Maybe we should take a break. No, I said, more sharply than I meant to. We're not doing that. Not this time. For years, every uncomfortable moment in this family had been swept under the rug, wrapped up in forced smiles and polite toasts. But not tonight. Not anymore. I don't want your pity, I continued, my tone calm again, deliberate. I don't need you to like Daniel. I just wanted you to show up, to be there. That's all I ever wanted from any of you. No one said a word. Even the air felt heavy, thick with all the things we'd never said. After a long pause, Dad finally spoke. Lauren, I'm sorry we weren't there, he said softly. I wish I'd known. I truly do. I nodded. I believed him, at least a little. But belief didn't undo the ache of watching the empty chairs where they should have been. Mom looked from him to me, eyes pleading. Can we not do this at Thanksgiving? I smiled faintly. This is the only time we ever talk, Mum. So yes, we're doing this at Thanksgiving. Amanda buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Ethan reached for her, but she pulled away, sobbing quietly. I didn't feel joy or triumph, just released. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. For the first time, they all saw her clearly not as the perfect daughter, but as the woman who'd stolen something she could never return. I gathered my phone and stood up slowly. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, the sound sharp and final. Lauren, where are you going? Mum asked. I think I've had enough family for one night. I said. No one stopped me. As I walked toward the door, I could still hear Amanda crying softly behind me. The sound used to tear me apart. Tonight, it just sounded distant. I slipped on my coat, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cold November air. The night was crisp, silent, honest. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Behind me, through the window, I saw them still seated, still stunned. For once, Amanda wasn't the star of the story. She was the lesson. And me. I wasn't invisible anymore. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. No music, no radio, just the steady hum of tires against the cold pavement and the faint echo of my mother's voice replaying in my head. Can we not do this at Thanksgiving? The irony almost made me laugh. All my life, I'd been told not to do this, not to feel too much, not to say too much, not to disturb the fragile peace they mistook for love. And tonight, I finally did the one thing they never expected. I stopped trying to keep the peace. By the time I reached Seattle, it was close to midnight. The city lights glimmered through the rain like 1,000 small apologies I'd never get from them. When I opened the door, Daniel was sitting on the couch, half asleep, a book resting on his lap. He looked up the second I walked in. "You made it back," he said softly, standing up. "How bad was it?" I took off my coat and hung it by the door. "Worse than usual," I admitted, "but also better, somehow." He didn't press for details. He just walked over, wrapped his arms around me, and let me sink into the kind of silence that doesn't demand explanation. That it was funny how quiet could feel like healing when you were finally in the right place after a while. He said, "Did you tell them?" I did, and they believed me. I let out a small laugh. Eventually, he pulled back, searching my face. "And how do you feel?" I thought about it for a moment. "Empty," I said, but not in a bad way. More like, space finally cleared out. I think I needed to make room for something else. He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You don't have to talk about it tonight." "I know," I whispered, "but I think I will." I made us tea, the familiar ritual grounding me as the kettle hissed softly. Daniel sat at the counter, patient as always. When I told them about the invitations, I began. You could have heard a pin drop. Amanda didn't even deny it. She just sat there, crying. Mum tried to cover for her. Dad, well, he looked ashamed, I think, but he didn't say much. Daniel's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. "I'm sorry you had to go through that alone." "I wasn't alone," I said. "Not really. I think, for the first time, I had myself." He smiled at that small, proud, a little sad. "That's my girl." We sat in silence for a while, just sipping tea, until the exhaustion finally settled in. But long after Daniel had gone to bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, letting the memories unwind like old film reels. Every birthday they forgot, every time I called and no one answered, every holiday I showed up to out of obligation, not joy. And suddenly, I realized how much of my life I'd spent auditioning for love that should have been unconditional. 2 days later, my mother called. I saw her name flash across the screen and stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Lauren," she said quickly, voice tight. "Can we talk?" "Sure," I said, though I already knew what this would be. "I've been thinking about what happened," she began, "and maybe we all said things we shouldn't have." "I didn't say much, Mom." There was a pause. "You know what I mean." "I do," I said quietly. "You mean you're sorry it happened in front of everyone?" Her silence confirmed it. "Amanda hasn't been herself," she continued, forcing a soft tone. "She feels awful, Lauren. She didn't mean to hurt you. She's always looked up to you, you know." I almost laughed. "Looked up to me?" "She has," Mom insisted. She doesn't show it the right way." "No, Mom," I said calmly. "She shows it exactly the way she means to. You just never wanted to see it." "Don't talk like that," she snapped. "She's your sister." "And I loved her," I said, my voice trembling. "More than she ever understand. But I can't keep loving people who hurt me just because they share my last name." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint crackle of static on the line. Then she said, almost pleading, "You can't just walk away from your family." I closed my eyes and took a breath. "Watch me," I said, and hung up. That weekend, Daniel and I took a drive out to the coast. It was one of those gray Washington days where the clouds seemed stitched to the water, and the wind carried the smell of salt and pine. We walked along the beach, not saying much. He didn't ask what was next, didn't offer advice, didn't try to fix what wasn't his to fix. He just walked beside me, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes soft and steady. At one point he stopped and said, "You did the right thing, you know." "Yes." He turned to face me. "Because sometimes peace doesn't come from making everyone happy. It comes from finally choosing yourself." The words sank deep, slow and heavy, for so long. I thought walking away meant failure, like giving up on them would make me the villain of the story. But standing there with the waves crashing behind me, I finally understood something. Leaving wasn't revenge. It was survival. Weeks passed. Amanda sent a few text apologies that read like rehearsed scripts. Mom emailed photos of the family Christmas tree. Dad called once, but hung up after 2 rings. I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because I didn't need to anymore. The silence was no longer punishment. It was peace. Every morning, Daniel made coffee just the way I liked it, 1 spoon of sugar, a splash of almond milk, nothing fancy. We'd talk about work, weekend plans, the little things, And every time I looked at him, I was reminded that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. He was there. That's all I ever wanted. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that Thanksgiving dinner, the look on Amanda's face when she realized she'd lost control, the way my mother's world tilted for the first time, and I'd feel, not joy, not satisfaction, just release, because I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. A month later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled across the front in familiar handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page. Amanda's handwriting again. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know the truth. I was jealous. You were always the good one. Everyone loved you without trying. I hated how easy it seemed for you. I'm sorry for taking that from you. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't reply. I just set it on the counter beside Daniel's coffee mug and whispered, "I forgive you," into the quiet room. Not for her. For me, that night, as Daniel and I watched the city lights flicker through the window, he reached over and took my hand. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Lighter," I said, like I finally put something down I'd been carrying my whole life. He smiled. "That's what healing feels like. It's quiet," and he was right. Healing wasn't fireworks. It wasn't revenge or grand apologies. It was coming home to someone who listened, who stayed, who saw you not because they had to, but because they chose to. Family, I realized, isn't made of blood. It's made of presence, of the people who show up and stay when the laughter fades and the silence starts. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't need my sister's approval, or my mother's validation, or anyone else's applause. I had peace. And peace, I learned, doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes, silence says everything. Time has a strange way of softening sharp memories. Weeks turned into months, and that Thanksgiving night became less like a wound and more like a scar, something I could touch without flinching. But never forget, life didn't change overnight. Healing never does. It happened in small, almost invisible ways. Mornings with coffee and laughter, long walks with Daniel by the pier, evenings spent cooking dinner together in our small kitchen while the rain tapped against the window. For once, my world was quiet, and the quiet wasn't lonely. Then, one afternoon in early spring, I got another letter. The handwriting was shaky, familiar. Amanda. I stood there for a long time before opening it. Inside were 2 pages, folded neatly. Her words pressed into the paper like she'd written them through tears. "Lauren, I don't know if you'll ever want to speak to me again. I've started therapy. My counselor says I need to stop comparing my worth to yours. I spent my whole life trying to win a race you weren't even running. I'm sorry, not just for the wedding, but for every time I made you feel small to make myself feel big. There was more. Apologies, explanations, promises to change." I folded the letter back up, placed it in my desk drawer, and didn't write back. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to reply to understand what it meant. Sometimes silence isn't punishment, it's peace. A few weeks later, the emails started coming. Then calls, then voicemails from my mom. "Your sister's trying, sweetheart. She really is. She's getting help. We'd love to see you. Maybe dinner next month. Lauren, please. Your mother misses you." I didn't respond to those either. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally learned the difference between forgiveness and return. Forgiveness sets you free. Return puts you back in the cage. It wasn't until nearly a year later that I went back. Not for a holiday. Not for Amanda. For my mother. She'd had a mild stroke, nothing fatal, thank God, but enough to shake everyone. Dad called me himself, his voice trembling. "She keeps asking for you," he said. So I went. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The flowers out front had wilted. The porch light flickered. It didn't feel like the place I grew up. It felt like a shell, holding echoes of people who had never really seen me. Mum was lying in her recliner, wrapped in a blanket. When she saw me, she tried to sit up. "Lauren," she whispered, her voice thin but warm. "You came." "I did," I said softly, taking her hand. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, listening to the soft tick of the old clock and the wind outside. Finally, she said, "I didn't know how to love you right." It was such a simple sentence, but it hit harder than all the shouting in the world. "I know," I said, "but I think you're trying now." Her eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could go back." I squeezed her hand gently. "You can't, but you can go forward." Amanda came by later that evening. I didn't recognize her at first. She looked different, smaller somehow, not in size but in presence. The glow she used to wear like armor was gone. She hesitated at the doorway. Hi, I wasn't sure you'd still be here." "I wasn't sure either," I said, and for the first time in years, there wasn't anger behind it. just truth. She stepped closer, clutching something in her hands, a small envelope. I wrote you another letter, she said quietly, but I figured I should probably say it in person this time. I nodded. Okay, I'm sorry, Lauren, her voice cracked. For everything. For making you feel invisible. For lying. For thinking that if I could tear you down, I'd somehow be enough. I was jealous. Always have been. You were the good one. Everyone loved you without trying. I hated that about you. I didn't move. I just let her words hang in the air until they settled. Finally, I said, you don't need to hate yourself to be forgiven. She blinked, stunned. So you forgive me? Yes, I said. But not for you, for me. I can't carry it anymore. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she nodded, her shoulders shaking with the kind of sobs that come from deep inside, the ones that finally break something open. We didn't hug, we didn't fall into each other's arms like some movie ending. We just stood there, two sisters, in the quiet truth of what was left and what could maybe, someday, grow again. Mum passed away 3 years later, peacefully, in her sleep. The funeral was small, simple. Amanda gave a eulogy that made everyone cry, including me. She talked about family, about learning too late that love isn't measured by approval but by presence. Afterward, we stood side by side at the cemetery, the spring wind brushing past us. She would have wanted us to be okay, Amanda said softly. I think we are, I replied. She smiled, and this time, it reached her eyes. Life kept moving. Seasons changed, grief softened, and the spaces once filled with pain slowly made room for something new. Daniel and I built a life that felt full and steady, a home filled with laughter, friends, and quiet mornings that didn't need fixing. We hosted dinners, spent weekends exploring the coast, and sometimes, when the sky turned orange over the water, I'd think about the girl I used to be, the one who begged to be seen. I wished I could tell her she didn't need their approval to exist. She just needed to stand up once, speak her truth, and walk away. Because sometimes, peace isn't about winning or proving anyone wrong. It's about letting go of the fight, the bitterness, the need to be understood. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Daniel turned to me and said, you ever think about going back? Back? I asked. To them, to all of it. I looked out at the fading light. No, I said softly, because I'm already home. He smiled, squeezing my hand, and in that moment, I realized something simple, something I wish I'd known years ago. Sometimes love isn't enough. You have to protect yourself from the people who don't know how to love you right. Family, I learned, isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who listens when you speak, and doesn't turn your silence into guilt. And as the last light of day faded across the horizon, I felt it again, that stillness, that quiet peace that had taken me years to find. But it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was just mine. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose peace over people, or walked away to protect your heart, know that you're not alone. Every week, we share stories like this one about love, betrayal, healing, and finding strength in silence. If you'd like to hear more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. And most importantly, take care of yourself, because sometimes, the quietest choices are the ones that change everything.